Mirrors by Greensearcher, Chapter 10. And before I get started, this will heavily cover watching a loved one die and the subsequent grief. So please, if any of you are experiencing this, my heart is with you. And if you don't want to listen, please wait until the next chapter. Okay, here we go. Adam stared into his room. It looked much like the same as when he'd left. Belle had even left the mirror back on the nightstand where he'd first picked it up. His eyes drifted to the corner table once again. The enchanted rose's glow sleeping through its cover as early evening shadows fell over the room. She promised not to touch anything, he recalled, even as he moved towards the symbol of his curse. Heart pounding, he carefully pulled the cloth cover from the glass encasement, squinting as the flower's brightness filled the dim space. It looked the same as always. A small pile of dead petals resting on the table's surface. Its stem hovered mysteriously above the table it sat upon. He counted the petals just to make sure. 9. Same as when he'd last counted the night before. A pang of guilt washed over him. He should never have doubted her. Adam sighed, replacing the cloth. Despite a mildly unhealthy obsession with the flower, he still didn't like the reminder staring him in the face at every waking moment. Turning back to the room, he chewed his lip as he thought, could I see just one more? Was it the mirror? Adam wondered suddenly, walking over to pick up the enchanted object. What could she have seen? Despite all its wonders, there were certainly any number of depressing sights in the world that could cause one grief. He himself had made the mistake of checking on his uncle's actions soon after receiving the enchanted object, which had left him sick and sleepless for days. Show me the last thing Belle asked to see, he told the mirror, unsure that it would work, but figured it was worth a try. The mirror glowed in response, and Adam found himself looking into a dark room. A few quiet candles surrounding a single bed. A man was hunched at the bedside, a wide-brimmed hat hanging against his back. Beside him, a thin figure was tucked into the sheets, coughing violently. Soon the door to the room opened, and the man looked back, a blood-soaked cloth in one hand. Maurice, Adam breathed, realization flooding him in an instant. He watched anxiously as a physician entered the room, speaking quiet words with Belle's father. Adam turned his attention back to the woman in the bed as they spoke. Like her sketches, she reminded him of Belle, only that she was older and much frailer. Eyes rimmed in a deep dark red, and her skin a pale grey. He didn't know what kind of condition Soleil had been in when she left, but he couldn't imagine it had been worse than this. Adam felt his throat growing tight. Belle saw her mother like this, he realised. Oh, God, no wonder she was... Before he could finish the thought, he found himself back against the wall, leaping over the balcony and landing with a loud thump on the floor below. His legs ached from the impact, but Adam ignored it as he raced towards the entryway and out into the cold evening air. Dropping to all fours, he raced out the gates and along the path. Belle! He called out, but the path was empty and quiet, but for the heavy thumping of his own limbs against the snow. He ran harder, trees whizzing past in a blur. Belle! He shouted again, hoping he could somehow catch up to her before she passed the... Ah! He cried, body thrown back by a force along the edge of the grounds. Head aching from the impact, Adam slowly pushed himself to his feet. He looked around as his vision cleared, noticing a nearby tree with several claw marks, too wide and deep to be done by any ordinary animal. He had put them there himself after all. Idiot, he grumbled, reaching out to feel for the barrier that had held him back. He rested a paw against the invisible wall, heart sinking in his chest as he stared at the path that lay beyond. Belle, he breathed, frustrated with himself for being so oblivious. But more than that, wondering why she had kept the truth from him. Line break. A lone hunter crouched in a tree, tucked between the branches and hidden by the shadows of early evening. He did not sport the red jacket he wore to town, but a simple brown shirt, slacks, and riding boots. It was not his attire that would impress tonight, but his kill. At least, should the animal show. He had been sitting, still as a viper, for hours now. This, however, was of little concern to the man. He had an exceptional ability to turn off his mind for hours, even days at an end. Indeed, it had probably been a good couple of weeks since he had had a thought more complex than what's for dinner. Still, when Gaston did make use of the organ residing behind his eyes, it proved to function surprisingly well. After all, he wasn't the greatest hunter in the province for nothing. It took no small skill to hunt down a beast, to spot the hidden tracks in the earth, to know when to wait and when to strike. Yet, unlike the father who had taught him, Gaston much preferred to trap his prey when he could. While many men found their thrill in a fast and violent hunt, Gaston found it in the quiet but deadly snap of a well-laid snare. There was really nothing like watching an animal succumb to something as simple as a knotted rope or a metal claw chained to the ground, and he felt no greater power than at the look of fear and helplessness in the eyes of his prey when he approached them from the shadows. You never saw that when felling a deer. By the time you came upon the kill, the animal's eyes were dead and lifeless. No, Gaston wanted to see the light leave their eyes. He hungered for it. The thought made his mouth water. He licked his lips, a small part of his brain recalling a similar feeling from something else. What was it? He wondered. He furrowed his brows for a long minute, only to grin in an instant as the answer came to him. Bow. He'd laid several traps for the girl already, each with a new lure. Flowers, jewellery, promises to pull her from her miserable life of poverty and bear the children of the greatest man alive. Gaston, he had been sure he had her this last time, but it seemed that irritating mother of hers had somehow made a miraculous recovery. Perhaps he should have paid for the woman's trip to Paris after all, just to be rid of her. He sighed. No loss, he convinced itself. It would simply be time to try another bait. At that moment, Gaston heard a quiet snap in the air. He breathed silently, watching as an enormous bear padded into his line of sight. The animal sniffed the air, moving directly for the slab of meat just below. Gaston watched in rapture, licking his lips again as the animal moved ever closer to the bait. That a girl. One more step and you're mine. The hunter's smile burst into a full-toothed grin at the violent crunch that rang out from below. Thick metal teeth tearing through the beast's front limb. The animal roared in pain, thrashing about and tugging in vain against the claw secured deep in the earth. It reared back, setting off a second trap that caught its hind foot, just as Gaston had planned. The bear looked up as he descended from his hiding place, landing heavily on the forest floor, and approaching the creature with a haughty stride. The bear roared again, swinging its free paw through the air, but unable to move more than a pace in either direction. Not so mighty now, are you? Gaston breathed. He cocked his gun quickly and fired. The bear let out a terrible roar, blood now seeping from its wounded shoulder. Gaston moved closer, reveling in his victory. He supposed most men would regret the wasted bullet, but he had plenty to spare. Besides, it was no fun to kill these creatures right away. He hoisted the weapon back up to his shoulder and fired again. Now wounded in the rear leg, the bear's roars had quieted to heavy breathing. Gaston smirked, reloading the gun once more, and finally taking aim for the animal's heart. Just before he fired, however, another cry rang out from the woods. Puzzled, Gaston looked around before spotting the source. An adolescent cub, perched in a lower branch, watching fearfully from the shadows. Gaston raised his brows, lowering the rifle as he realized what he had done. Behind him, the mother cried out again, though this was clearly a sound of panic more than pain. "A little one, eh?" he asked the creature. She only moaned, her strength nearly gone, as she looked back at him with dark eyes. If he didn't know any better, he might think she was begging, pleading. "Well, this changes things," he said roughly. He hoisted the gun back up, turning it towards the cub's hiding place. "Looks like I'm getting 2 for 1 today." Line break. "Good morning!" Belle's voice was chipper as she entered the stables, yet her smile was too tight, her movements too stiff. Perhaps Adam would have missed these things, however, if he didn't know better. "Belle," he said quietly, standing a pace away and watching her untie Philippe's saddle with shaking fingers. "Yes?" she asked, voice higher than normal, as she threw the saddle up onto its hook and worked to untie her cloak. "I know what you saw yesterday." She froze in place, biting her lip hard before continuing to struggle with the cloak. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said nervously. Sighing, he took a small step towards her. "Belle, I saw her too." By now, Belle had given up trying to untie the knot and was simply tugging at it madly. Why won't this come loose?" she muttered, hands quaking with each breath. Without really thinking about what he was doing, Adam moved forward and covered her small hands with one of his. "Belle, stop." She did, fingers relaxing beneath his as she stared at her feet. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked carefully. Belle only shook her head, eyes squeezed shut. "Was it the money?" he prodded. "You know I don't care about that. It could never be wasted on giving her a chance to." "It wasn't that," she whispered at last. "Not just that, anyway." "Then what is it?" She was quiet for a long moment, pursing her lips as she stared at his paw over her fingers. It wouldn't be fair," she said at last. "You've lost so much, Adam. Your parents, your kingdom, your body even. My pain. What's a sick mother compared to your suffering?" she asked, shaking her head. "I have no right to grieve." "What?" he breathed, eyes growing wide as he processed her words. "No, Belle, that's not... You can't make comparisons like that," he said earnestly. And even if you could, have I ever known poverty, Belle? Or hunger?" She shook her head slowly. "Have I ever been sent home from school because of my sex?" he growled. Or had to endure the harassment of some scoundrel in town?" "I suppose not," she confessed softly. "But you have," he breathed. He brought his other paw to her shoulder, forgetting his shyness in his desperation to make her understand. "Please, talk to me. Let me help. He stopped, swallowing roughly. "I'll do anything to help you." She sucked in a shaky breath, eyes finally filling with tears. "Oh, Adam," she gasped, her face contorting in the pain she had been hiding. I'm so frightened. She looks so much worse than... What if she doesn't... What if she... Belle stopped, hiding her face in her hands as her shoulders began to tremble. Adam's arms moved on their own, wrapping around her small frame and pulling her against him in an instant. He suddenly didn't care that he was 8-foot-tall living monster with fur and fangs, for that something in his chest couldn't let him just stand there and watch as she wept. At the contact, Belle stiffened for a brief moment, but soon his shirt was caught in her fingers, her face buried against him. He wasn't sure how long they stood there, his mind awash with memories of watching his father's men return empty-handed from the woods that took his mother. For him, it had been only days of waiting. Belle had been watching her mother grow ill for years, and still didn't know what would happen. Adam ran a long thumb across her back, knowing even he couldn't understand what that kind of dreadful uncertainty would feel like. He pulled her closer. I'm sorry, she said at last through shaky breaths.
Don't be,
he breathed, recalling her own words to him weeks before as she wrapped his bleeding palms.
I'm here to help. Remember?
She pulled back slowly, brushing her fingers along her cheeks, before looking back up at him with still wet eyes. In that instant, Adam realised what he had to do.
You must go to them,
he rasped, mind still screaming at him not to let her leave, but heart sure in its decision. He sucked in a breath, continuing.
Sir Giles can go with you, and perhaps we can pay one of your neighbours to be your escort.
I can't, she whispered miserably. The pass is covered with snow. Any wagons to the city won't depart until spring. And there's no way a horse could make it through alone. So she'd already thought of it. Any relief Adam may have felt was erased in an instant by the terrible distress on her face. They were quiet for a long moment, Belle rubbing her knuckles against her cheeks, while Adam kept a paw on her shoulders, trying to think of anything he could do. Do you think I could see her again? She asked at last.
Of course, he said quickly, before getting an idea. And, if you'd like, Dr. Mathias could look too, and maybe tell you more of what's happening, he offered.
She pursed her lips, nodding slowly. Yes. All right. Line break.
Show us Belle's mother,
Adam told the mirror quietly, placing it on the small table where the physician waited. Beside him, Belle watched anxiously, the corner of her lip now starting to bleed where she had been chewing it. The small hospital room appeared in the reflection, and the ear horn leaned over as he studied the woman on the surface. Why are they doing that? Belle asked suddenly. Adam glanced at the mirror, noticing her mother's arm resting atop a bowl filled with blood, dripping slowly from a clean cut on her skin.
It helps remove the bad blood, mademoiselle,
the doctor explained. Oh. Mathias watched the mirror for several more minutes, and Adam tried not to flinch with each desperate choking cough that came from the room in the enchanted object.
Show me her charts, please,
the doctor instructed further, and the mirror obeyed. He was silent for a long time as he read, before the image vanished and he looked back up at them. Given the doctor's form, Adam couldn't read his expression.
Well,
he asked quietly.
She has an advanced stage of consumption, the man explained slowly. You did well to send her to Paris. They will be able to care for her night and day, and keep her well nourished and comfortable.
Belle was quiet for a long moment. But, she breathed. The ear horn sighed.
I'm afraid I've never seen someone recover at this stage. I would advise that you prepare yourself for the worst, my dear.
Line break. It was a quiet night in Paris, yet the sounds of the sick and dying cut through the air in the hospital's cold halls. So busy were the caretakers that no one noticed the mirror in the entryway as it slowly grew in size, or the old woman who stepped through its glass and into the shadows. Returning the mirror to its original form, the enchantress waited in silence for several long minutes. Soon a young nurse emerged from a nearby room, a basin of water in hand and a frantic look on her face.
Please,
the witch rasped, feigning weakness and reaching out for her in desperation. Please, young one, give a tired old woman a place to stay for the night. The girl looked startled for a moment, but a look of compassion soon replaced it. Oh, madame, of course, she offered, setting down the basin and hurrying over to the woman's side. The nurse wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her hand firmly in hers with the confidence of one skilled caring for the weak. I'll need to check with the director, the girl went on, but it shouldn't be a problem. Here, let's get you warm. The nurse led the enchantment into a small parlour, a warm fire burning in the hearth. Thank you, dear, the witch said as she sat, gripping the girl's hand when she tried to pull away. You've given me just what I needed. The nurse smiled warmly, though she seemed a bit surprised at the old woman's firm hold. Of course, madame. I'll be back shortly. The witch released her at last, and the girl stood and rushed out of the room to make the inquiry and continue with her tasks. As soon as the door shut behind her, the witch's skin glowed and her body took on the form of the very nurse who had just left. She didn't waste a moment. Moving swiftly out of the parlour, the enchantress headed straight for her target. 3 flights up and at the end of the hall, and there she was. She pushed open the door and blinking against a dark room. The man inside didn't even acknowledge her presence. He lay in what looked like a terribly uncomfortable position on the edge of the bed, arms draped around its occupant. The woman was clearly on the verge of death, each breath sounding like she was drowning in her own blood, which, given the condition, she essentially was. Too bad it's the mother and not the girl, the witch thought viciously.
Back already? The man asked numbly, now sitting up as he finally acknowledged her presence.
Forgot to check her pulse, she lied, reaching for the patient's hand and squeezing it tight, the other fumbling absently for a beating in the wrist that she could really care less about. Instead, she focused on stealing her second form of the night, breathing in deeply as the magic did its work. Unlike her others, this spell did no harm, though the enchantress wondered if killing the woman now wouldn't be more of a blessing than a curse given her condition. She huffed, pulling away. Like she would waste her stores on the comfort of this woman, the woman who had brought that wretched, arrogant, irritatingly beautiful girl into the world, to wreck her plans once again. No, the mother deserved no such mercy. The innocent always deserve mercy, my apprentice. The witch stood suddenly, cursing the distant but familiar voice in her head. She had been rid of her wretched master for years. Why couldn't the woman just leave her alone? Leaving the man to his dying wife, she rushed out of the room and back through the halls. In her irritation, she nearly ran into the very nurse whose form she had taken. Catching herself at the last moment, she ducked quickly into an empty room. The witch sighed heavily, pressing her back against the door and breathing heavily. Just as the footsteps in the hall began to fade, she spotted a small metal basin resting on the floor near her feet. The enchantress picked it up slowly, its surface reflecting the moonlight that spilled through the window. When she held it up to her face, a blurry reflection shone back from its surface. Smiling once again, the pseudo-mirror began to grow in her grasp. I have what I came for, she told herself, reminded of the perfect plan she had concocted that very night. After this, he'll never forgive her. Line break. Adam was sitting beside one of the couches in the library, a warm fire crackling behind him and casting deep shadows across the dim room. He tugged the soft blanket further over Belle's shoulders, keeping a paw against her back as she lay in a fitful sleep. Beside her lay the mirror, the image of the dark hospital room still glowing from its frame. It had been several days, and for once Belle had put up no resistance to his offer to stay, each waking moment spent watching, waiting. Adam reached out with his other hand, carefully pulling Belle's signature lock of loose hair from her eyes before letting his large paw rest against her head. He ached for such a closeness with her for weeks now, but he never wanted it to be like this. Master, a kind voice whispered from beside him. Adam blinked once, looked down to see Mrs. Potts on the carpet beside him. Can I get you anything, dear? She asked gently. He shook his head. They sat in silence for several long minutes, the last lingering light of day disappearing and immersing the library in darkness.
Mrs. Potts,
he whispered at last, barely audible over the crackling fire.
Why do bad things happen to good people?
Oh, love, she said quietly. That's part of this world we live in, I'm afraid.
It isn't fair. She doesn't deserve this,
he went on, swallowing against the lump that formed in his throat. I know, and neither did you. Adam was quiet, the memories of his past replaying in his thoughts, as they had been since receiving the news of Belle's mother.
I'd go through it all again, if it would help,
he breathed.
I'd do anything.
He stopped, grinding his teeth hard against the moisture building in his eyes.
But I can't,
he choked out. You can be there for her, dear, Mrs. Potts replied. We all will. Though I believe you're in a position to help her the most. Adam nodded, looking back at Belle as she slept.
I'll try.
Belle continued to sleep as the night wore on. Adam stayed awake to watch the mirror, knowing she would want to be woken should anything change. He found sleep evasive as it was, mind in a tumble of thoughts and heart in knots. Eventually, however, he must have dozed off, since he found himself stirred from sleep to the soft light of dawn. Lifting his head from the edge of the couch, he looked up to see Belle's eyes open as she sat staring at the mirror. Adam looked anxiously at the reflection, heart sinking into his stomach at the edges. Maurice sat beside the bed, hunched over as a long sheet covered the still body beside him. In place of the terrible choking breaths was an even worse silence.
Well,
he breathed, words escaping him as he moved carefully beside her. Instead, he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, aching to fix what couldn't be undone. She remained quiet, eyes glazed over as she brushed her fingers across the mirror's surface. A moment later, she set it aside.
I'd like to go to my room, if that's all right,
she whispered.
Oh, of course,
he agreed, helping her to her feet and keeping a firm arm around her as he held her hands aloft with the other. He slowly guided her through the castle's quiet halls. The typical chatter of servants dulled as if a darkness had fallen over the inhabitants. As they reached her room, she spoke again.
May I be alone?
Realizing what she meant, Adam pushed open the door and quietly ordered the living objects to exit the space. They moved past, disappearing in solemnity into the halls as Belle moved inside.
Will you be all right?
he asked, before biting his lip at the foolishness of such a question, at such a time. Belle only nodded.
Merci,
she replied, before shutting the door behind her. Adam remained in place, staring at the wooden panels, unable to move, unsure where he would go if he could. It was what he heard next that broke him. Though clearly stifled through a pillow, his ears easily picked up on the aching sobs spilling from the other side of the door. Adam clenched his fists, finally letting his own tears spill into his fur, as a far greater helplessness than one he ever felt washed over him. Line break.
And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes.
Adam sat as still as stone on the hard pew, the others equally silent and sombre in the cold chapel. Even Cardinal Marius's words seemed more hushed than normal, quoting several biblical passages that were clearly meant to bring comfort in the current situation. It did little to ease the knots in Adam's chest. However, for all he could think of was the woman still in isolation in the north wing.
And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying.
It had been 2 weeks since Soleil's passing, and Belle hadn't left her room yet. In fact, the only assurance he had she was all right was from Mrs. Potts, who had been doing her best to keep her fed and cared for.
Neither shall there be any more pain.
The longer the service went on, the more tense he became. The words of peace only seemed to make him more frustrated.
What good were promises of the future when Belle was hurting so much right now?
He suddenly found himself on his feet, Marius's voice cutting off at once, the servants all looking towards him in surprise.
He
started, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat. He couldn't finish, so instead he simply bolted from the room. Deep within the castle's depths, he stopped. He ground his teeth, throwing his fists against the wall.
Damn it!
He swore, not for the first time since it had happened.
Damn it, Marius, why couldn't they make her better?
He shouted. The old physician just sat calmly as his master paced the office in an unusual fit of anger. We have no cure, my lord, he explained, and very few live once the disease has begun its course, be they kings or peasants.
Well, why haven't you found a cure then?
Marius remained silent. They both knew it was a pointless question. Adams finally stopped his pacing, bowing his head in defeat.
I'm sorry, Marius,
he said in shame. There's no need to apologize, my lord.
Such things are never easy to accept.
Adam bit his lip.
What was the point? He asked gruffly. Why did we even send her away if she was just going to die? Perhaps we should have brought them all here. We could have taken care of her. And at least then Belle would have been with her mother when she...
He trailed off, swallowing against the lump in his throat. Master,
you mustn't blame yourself for things that you couldn't have foreseen,
the doctor said solemnly.
I'm sure the Mademoiselle and her father would have always wondered if there would have been a chance in the city, had they been able to take the opportunity.
Adam nodded. He knew Marius was right. And he knew it wasn't right to blame himself, just as it wasn't right to blame the doctor before him. Still, having someone to blame seemed better than chalking it up to random fate. Adam looked around. He had wandered into the north wing, as he had so often done over the last fortnight. Before him stood Belle's doors, and he rested his fingers against their surface, desperate to rush in and gather her in his arms. He resisted, however, pulling away and staring at his feet. She would come to him when she was ready. At least, he hoped she would. Line break. Belle sat on the edge of her bed, hand resting on her knees as she stared into the darkness. The energy to cry had long since been replaced by a strange numbness in her limbs and behind her eyes, though the terrible knot inside remained. It felt like a cruel fist was constantly squeezing her heart, so hard sometimes she wondered if the organ wouldn't be torn straight from her chest. She sighed tiredly, unable to sleep well, glancing absently around the room. A dozen warm blankets sent by the staff sat in a small heap by the fire. Another pile of books sat beside them that Adam had sent in with Mrs. Potts, though mostly remained unread. At the window, a beautiful arrangement of holly and laurels from the gardens resting on the ledge. Her eyes moved towards the bedside table next. Several letters sat on its surface, mainly penned at the request of others by the old tutor who was encased in a quill, though one message was simply a pattern of circles in the shape of a heart made by a very concerned little teacup. Belle felt bad that she hadn't been able to thank everyone. She just hadn't found the courage yet to face them. What would they say? What would she say? Pursing her lips, she caught another note, written a couple of weeks earlier, and sent in atop Anne's tea tray, along with the enchanted mirror. Cemetery de Saint-Léonce, tomorrow, 9 o'clock. It was in Adam's hand, and she hadn't needed an explanation to know what it meant. She had watched the small funeral and burial from the mirror in numb silence, wishing more than anything she could be with Papa. He looked worse than she had ever seen him, and so terribly alone. If only the paths to the city weren't covered with snow, then she could go to him. As it was, she couldn't even write to him until spring. The tears she thought had dried up welled up in her eyes once more. She wondered if she'd ever feel happy again. She swallowed roughly, looking back down at the last line of the short note.
I'm here when you need me.
Belle bit her lip against the tears now falling down her cheeks, brushing her fingers over the words before setting it aside. Laying back down, she shut her eyes, desperate to push her thoughts away for a few hours. The beginnings of a restful sleep had just fallen over her when she caught quiet footsteps echoing off the walls. Pushing herself up onto her elbow, Belle stared into the dark room. "Hello?" she asked anxiously. "Is someone there?" She heard the footsteps again, accompanied by a large shadow that shifted against the wall. Belle bolted upright in bed. She suddenly felt stricken with fear, gripping the sheets tightly and holding her breath, a sudden paralysis preventing her from doing anything but waiting in silence for something to happen. And she couldn't stop the words of the old woman's story from rushing into her head once again. While the damsel slept, the beast crept silently into her chambers. She shook her head. That's absurd, she thought with chagrin, though she almost wished it were Adam, as her mind conjured up a dozen different frightening possibilities. Several minutes passed, and all remained still. That's funny, Belle thought at last, relaxing a little. I'm sure there was someone. She gasped as a figure finally emerged. Its frame was much smaller than the shadows she suggested. Its face was shadowed, but they soon pulled back a thick hood. Belle's heart flew into her throat. Mamma! She choked out. The woman nodded. Belle bolted from the bed, throwing herself into her mother's arms, unable to hold back fresh tears as the woman returned to the embrace. I must be dreaming, Belle realised absently, though she pushed the thought aside, desperate to keep her mother close as long as she could. She wasn't sure how much time had passed before she finally pulled back. To Belle's shock, they no longer stood in the cold room, but in a bright, beautiful garden. Where are we? She breathed. Is this heaven? Her mother only smiled, though she didn't meet her eyes as she cast her gaze towards the landscape. Come, I have something to show you, she spoke, taking Belle's hand and guiding her down the garden path. Belle grasped her back tightly, desperate to not let her slip away. They wove through several long, interconnected paths. Though the sun was strong overhead, Belle shivered, her bare feet cold against the stone below. It seemed as though she had grown used to the comfort of her private hearth on thick, warm bedding over the last couple of weeks. They soon reached an end to the path, passing through an archway that led into a bush settled in the corner of the open courtyard. A single flower grew from its top, more stunning than anything they had encountered on their way. A rose? Belle asked quietly, looking back at her mother. The woman smiled again, nodding back towards the bush. Belle followed her gaze. It's beautiful, she admitted. It's a gift, her mother said softly. Go on, take it. Belle nodded with some confusion, reaching towards the delicate flower. She stopped, however, at the sight of the sharp thorns along its stem. She curled her fingers back in hesitation. Don't worry, it won't hurt you, her mother went on in earnest. Belle bit her lips, but obeyed. Just before her fingers graced the tender stem, however, a strong hand grabbed her, tugging her back. Maman was gone in an instant. The gardens were vanishing, and a strange glass case fell over the rose before her, now glowing against a dark room. Maman! Belle cried out in shock, eyes scanning the new surroundings in desperation. Maman! Where are you? Belle! A deep voice spoke. The force that had stopped her hand was now holding her tight. She gasped for breath, a terrible dread falling over her as she slowly returned to reality. So it was a dream, she realised, fresh grief overwhelming her. Belle realised she was shaking and clung to the soft warmth that surrounded her. Belle, the voice repeated. She pulled back, looking up into familiar blue eyes that stared at her from the darkness. Adam? She asked. He was crouched down, arms still resting loosely around her. Belle noticed he was shirtless, and she suddenly realised what that soft warmth must have been. Where are we? She asked. She couldn't read the expression on his face as he spoke. My room. Oh! She breathed, suddenly aware she was wearing nothing but her chemise. Any embarrassment she felt, however, was quickly erased by the confusion of everything that had happened. She looked back at the rose, the only thing that hadn't disappeared with her dream. She didn't know what it was, or why it was here, but something told her she had almost made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry! I didn't know! She rasped. The dark room itself now seemed to disappear as her vision grew blurry. I thought I was in a garden! I thought I was with Mammal!
It's all right,
he whispered. She felt a heavy fabric falling over her shoulders as Adam wrapped her in one of his own robes.
It's okay, Belle.
She was here. I thought she was here, she said desperately, throat going tight with grief. But she's gone. Oh, Adam, she's really gone. He was holding her again, and Belle snaked her arms around his neck, hiding her face in the soft fur. She felt the sobs building in her chest, breath shaky and irregular as she tried to tame them.
You can cry,
he said gently. She felt his fingers brush over her hair.
No one will hear but me.
Unable to hold it back any longer, Belle nodded and let forth a small cry, which soon dissolved into ugly sobs. She let his neck dampen the sound, his fur soak up her tears as she gave in to her body's demand to weep. His fingers continued to run over her head, then slowly working their way into her hair. It was soothing, and Belle soon quieted, letting herself be comforted in a way she hadn't realised that she needed.
Here,
Adam offered several minutes later. He picked her up carefully, cradling her against him before standing and heading towards the door.
Let's get you back to your room.
No, not yet, Belle whispered, suddenly desperate not to be alone again. He paused in his tracks, hesitating a long moment. She felt his heart thump several times beneath his chest, before he turned around, padding softly towards his large bed. She soon felt herself tucked into the sheets, robe and all.
Try to sleep,
Adam breathed, resting his paw against her side where she lay.
I'll stay right here, if you want.
Belle nodded tiredly, exhaustion flooding over her. Yet, at the same time, the knot in her chest seemed to finally loosen, if just a little. Line break. Adam sat beside his bed. Belle had fallen asleep quickly, and he'd soon dragged the fireplace rug over so he could stay beside her. However, he knew he wouldn't be sleeping well that night. He looked over at the corner table, the soft pink glow taunting him from the glass case.
That was too close,
he thought, chewing his lip as he looked back over at Belle's sleeping form. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought I was in a garden. I thought I was with Mama. He believed her, and it wasn't what she'd almost done that bothered him, nor even her grief, though of course the latter still hurt. No, what troubled him now was the way he had found her, standing in her white nightgown, in the dead of night, unaware of his presence, and obeying some unseen order. It was so familiar. Too familiar. To another woman from his memories, standing in a doorway, speaking to the empty air, before stepping into a storm and disappearing from his life forever. His mother had been ill, seeing things she shouldn't have been. He was starting to worry he had inherited her sickness too, though he hadn't seen anyone strange since the older woman had appeared in his mirror. But now, had Belle been seeing them too? Could this possibly be related?
I'm jumping to conclusions,
he realised. Belle had just lost her mother after all. It made sense she would dream of her. Even the sleepwalking wasn't entirely unexpected, not given everything that had happened. No, he was simply overreacting, as he always did. Just like when she had first started coming, and he had been so terrified that she would encounter the forest's wolves.
You can't compare everything to what happened to Mama,
he told himself sternly, finally laying down on the rug and closing his eyes. Still, a voice in the back of his mind replied,
I won't take any chances.
Line break. With a flash of light, Soleil's form emerged from the mirror into a lavish room. Several dozen more mirrors lined the walls, surrounding a vanity where she promptly sat, smiling at her reflection and gloating in victory. While it would have been simpler to curse the young woman directly, playing with her perceptions was certainly amusing in its own right. Still, that night's spells had taken a toll on her. No matter, she told herself. Her little game was sure to do the trick. Anxious to see its outcome, She quickly touched the surface of the mirror with the tip of one finger. Its surface dissolved into a scene of her beast, holding a woman against him.
What?
The enchantress rasped, nose wrinkling at the sight. She continued to watch in disbelief, the girl's pathetic sobs grinding to their very core. Unable to take it any longer, the witch sucked in a deep breath and let forth a scream of fury. "Does he realise what she could have done?" she shrieked, grabbing a brush from the tabletop and flinging it full force against the mirror before her. The mirror shattered into a dozen pieces, the vision disappearing along with them. She stood furiously, grinding her teeth as she paced her chambers. He was supposed to send her away, not comfort the wretched girl, she fumed. You can't assume others will react as you would, Circe. The witch clenched her fists. Sometimes she wished her magic could erase the memories of her old master, but of course that wasn't possible. Or at least she didn't think it was possible. If only she'd be able to complete her training. But her master had become far too much of a nuisance before such was possible. She had had no choice but to seal her away. Taking a deep breath, the witch ran a hand over her hair, managing to calm herself before casting her fingertips towards the broken mirror and returning the mirror back to normal. No loss, she convinced herself. As much as she'd wanted the young prince to abandon the girl himself, she realized she may have to take a more direct approach with him. After all, she still had her trump card left. A few more weeks, and she should have plenty of magic built up to make it work. The beast thought he had months left. She had told him so herself, after all. Certainly he wouldn't be rushing to any confessions of love just yet. Yes, this will work, she thought with a new triumph. I'll simply play into his desires. He was only a man, after all. And deep down, all men wanted the same thing. Line break. Adam woke to a quiet tapping at his door. He looked up, disorientated at first, before remembering he was now laid beside the bed. Peeking over at the edge, he saw Belle curled up within the covers, his robe pulled up to her chin, still sound asleep even as the morning sunlight spilled over them. He let himself watch her for a moment, his heart swelling with that new-found feeling that somehow grew deeper each day. He knew what it was, though he was afraid to admit it just yet. Afraid of the ache that would inevitably come when she would never feel it back. Belle curled closer in on herself, sighing in her sleep. Adam had a sudden desire to crawl into the blankets beside her, hold her against him and breathe in her sweet smell, and run his fingers through her hair like he had the night before. A second knock broke through his thoughts. He shook his head roughly, standing and padding silently towards the door. "Good morning," said Mrs. Potts pleasantly, before pulling it open. "Just looking for Belle. She's here, is she not?"
That is,
Adam stuttered. He bit his lip hard, trying before going on seriously.
Mrs. Potts, it's not what it looks like.
The teapot smiled. "No need to worry, dear. I know you better than that. I only assumed once she was ready to emerge, she would come to you first." "Oh," he said dumbly. He was about to explain what had really happened, but suddenly wondered if Belle would be embarrassed by it. Instead, he moved into the hall and shut the door behind him.
"She's, still asleep,"
he explained. "Oh, good. Poor thing hasn't had a decent night's sleep in a fortnight. Well, we'll let her rest then. In the meantime, let's get some breakfast in you, and perhaps we can bring some up once she rises." Adam nodded, following a couple of paces before he stopped in place.
"Actually, I promised I wouldn't leave," he recalled.
"Well then, best you stay put," said Mrs. Potts unfazed. "We'll bring up a couple of trays in an hour or so."
"Thank you, Mrs. Potts,"
he said, turning back to the door. He paused, glancing nervously towards Anne and then across the quiet hall in search of eavesdroppers. "Don't fret, love. It'll be our little secret." Mrs. Potts winked, as though reading his thoughts. Adam felt his cheeks burning, though Mrs. Potts and Anne only chuckled to themselves as he rolled away. Line break.
"Let's go, boy,"
Max lifted his head off of his front paws from where he lay beside the kitchen hearth, standing and heading obediently towards the back door.
Not outside today,
Adam went on, moving up the stairs towards the main level. Max followed, and then stopped at the foot of the stairs, cocking his head in question.
You can come up,
he went on, both amused and impressed at how well trained the dog was.
Come on, you want to see Belle, don't you?
Max wagged his tail excitedly at the sound of her name, bounding up the stairs behind Adam and entering the grand halls for the first time. Master! Someone cried in shock. Adam looked up, noticing Cogsworth standing along the rug, pointing a gold accusatory arm in their direction. What is that animal doing in the castle? Adam nearly noted that a beast had already been roaming the halls for years, but decided to keep it to himself.
I've got a job for him,
he shrugged, continuing down the long corridor with Max at his heels. But, my lord, we only just polished the floors and... Adam ignored him, leading Max up a few flights of stairs and into the north wing, where Belle was comfortably settled back in her own room for the night. Just as they reached her door, he crouched down to the dog's level.
You're going to take good care of Belle tonight, okay?
He directed. He glanced around, but the halls were silent. Still, he lowered his voice before going on.
Stay alert and keep your ears open.
At that, Max sat up a little straighter, pointed ears on end, before panting happily.
Exactly.
Adam sighed in satisfaction, giving the animal a good rub behind the ears before standing and knocking quietly on the door. Come in. He opened the door a few inches, and peeking inside. She was sitting amidst a pile of blankets near the hearth, clothed in one of her own sized robes, looking up from a book in her hands. She seemed relieved to see him, though maybe that was his imagination.
You have a visitor,
Adam said, smiling a bit. Belle furrowed her brows in confusion, but her expression turned to one of joy as Max ran inside and nearly knocked her onto her back. After a minute of ensuing licks and cuddles, Max finally calmed down, settling against her side and resting his head in her lap. Thank you, Belle said earnestly as Adam sat carefully beside them. She was smiling, but it almost looked like she might start crying again at any second. Adam reached out, resting a paw on top her opposite shoulder.
I'm sorry I didn't think to bring him up sooner,
he said with regret. I could have gone down. She trailed off, staring into her lap.
Wasn't ready to see anyone.
Belle nodded, before taking a deep breath. Maybe tomorrow, she decided.
I'll come by in the morning, and we can go down together,
he offered. There was no mistaking her relief at that. Suddenly Adam felt her arms wrap around him as far as they could reach. I don't think I can make it through this without you, she whispered against him. Adam returned the embrace in an instant.
You could.
He swallowed roughly, but went on.
You're strong and brave. But I'm here to help a little, anyway.
Belle seemed to hug him tighter at that, and Adam couldn't recall anything feeling so right. He rested his cheek against her head, hoping that she felt as much comfort from this as he did. After a few moments, she pulled away, tucking that wavy lock of hair behind her ear. So, what is that rose, anyway? She asked. The corner of Adam's mouth tugged up at that, glad to see Belle's innate curiosity wasn't gone.
Well, it determines... Oh!
He quickly choked on his words, throat closing up for a long moment.
Ugh, that is really annoying, he huffed once he regained his voice.
Belle looked deep in thought for a moment before raising a brow. So you just don't like flowers? She asked wryly. Normally he'd have made a face, but Adam was so relieved to see a bit of Belle's old self coming back that he only grinned.
No, I just don't like flowers, he chuckled.
At that they heard another knock, and Mrs. Potts wheeled in through the half-open door. Sorry to bother you, loves. It's just thought Belle might want her tea now. I think I'll be able to sleep without it tonight, Mrs. Potts, Belle replied warmly. Oh, well, that's good to hear. Though there is another thing, Mrs. Potts went on, but before she could finish, Chip peeked out from behind her and hopped straight into Belle's lap. Even in her surprise, she managed to catch him and cradled the boy in her palms of her hand. Belle, I missed you. Are you okay? He asked anxiously.
Sorry, dear,
His grandmother said, sighing. I just couldn't convince him to wait any longer. It's okay, Belle said, looking back down at the little cup. I'm all right, Chip. Thank you for the sweet little painting. Chip only fidgeted nervously in her palms, looking back at Adam for a moment before speaking again. Master told me you lost your mamma. Like him. And like me.
Jack!
Mrs. Potter whispered nervously from behind them. Belle only stared at him, breathing shallowly. Yes, that's right. The little cup sagged in place. I'm sorry, Belle, he said sadly, leaning gently against her cupped fingers. I love you. Oh, Chip, I love you too, she said, lifting the child up to kiss his porcelain rim. Mrs. Potts and Anne made soft noises behind them, clearly touched by the sweet scene. Yet Adam, for his part, just sat in a stupor.
I'm not jealous of a 10-year-old, he told himself sternly.
As the others began to leave, his thoughts grew more serious.
Could it really be so easy to say those 3 words to her?
He started to wonder. He shook his head quickly. Clearly they had a much different meaning coming from a child than they would from him. Besides, after everything that had happened, it didn't feel right to take advantage of her raw emotions by bringing something like that up so soon. Distracted, he hadn't noticed the others leave or Belle moving across the room until she came back beside him, holding out a large bundle. Here, she said, and he noticed the familiar bundle of the robe he had wrapped around her the night before. Thank you for, letting me borrow it, she said, cheeks turning a bit pink at the memory.
Keep it. I've got another,
Adam said warmly. He looked around to where they sat and said, smiling,
You can add it to your blanket nest.
She glanced at the soft fabrics around her and flushed a bit more, even as she pressed the robe back against her chest.
I'll see you in the morning,
he went on, having little desire to leave, but noticing the tired look in her eyes. She nodded gratefully. Good night.
Good night.
Adam stood, moving towards the open door. Just before shutting it, however, he glanced back into the room. She had unfolded the giant robe, and he watched as she pulled it around her shoulders, leaning into Max and staring into the fire. He felt his chest swell with warmth once again. Maybe he couldn't say the words aloud, but he could no longer deny them.
Good night, Belle, he thought. I love you.
End of chapter. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed that one because, oh my sweet lord, that was really, really hard. I hope I didn't make you guys too sad by listening to that. That was devastating. And if any of you need any help, please, there are people you can go to that would be more than willing to help you feel better, or at least help you process what has happened in your own lives. Even though I'm not one to give advice normally, know that you're not alone, okay? Anyway, on to things I like about this. Adam's genuine care and the fact that he doesn't take advantage of the fact that she's vulnerable. That is top tier levels of being a gentleman there. And little Chip, oh my god, he's only 10! And, he relates to both Adam and Belle because he lost his mother too when he was a baby. I mean, oh, sweet God, give that boy a hug. Give them all a hug. And Belle and Maurice as well. And oh my God, oh, that was so sad. But I'm glad Belle has Adam and Max and everyone giving her space. And and also that vision. Speaking of respecting people's boundaries, Cersei. Oh my god. She made a hallucination of Belle's dead mother the night her mother died to try to get Adam angry at Belle. There are so many levels of things that are disgustingly wrong with that I can't even bring them up here. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this again. Remember to check out my other videos and like, comment and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!